Welcome to the channel and welcome to this review of Alone in the Dark. So, while I did play the first and the third game when I was a little brat, I never really got beyond the first screens. These were hard as nails and bloody unforgiving. My next try then was with The New Nightmare from 2001. And holy shit. At the time I thought this was and will forever be the most terrifying game out there. Okay, so that was of course before getting my skid marks with Dead Space. Anyway, it's now time for the reboot of the game that started it all. Alone in the Dark. Is it as flat as the scores of large reviewers want us to believe? Or are those pages just following what their brain-dead audience wants them to say? Well, let's find out. And story is first. So, the game is set in 1930 and starts with a joyride of our two heroes, Emily Hartwood and Detective Edward Carnby. They are on a country road somewhere in Louisiana, pretty much to take them home, I guess. Our couple, strictly business of course, is heading towards the Derceto Manor to visit Emily's paranoid uncle, Jeremy Hartwood.
I received a disturbing letter from Jeremy accusing the staff and all the other patients of being involved in some cult. And now
Jeremy seems to be bonkers.
He says a dark man is following him, watching him at all times.
But it gets even better. Apparently her whole family is completely gaga.
Practically every member of the Hartwood family is driven mad before they grow old.
So, clever Jeremy is at the manor to open up in a good old group therapy.
It's a story he tells himself, Mr. Carnby. Anything to avoid the truth.
On the one hand, Emily thinks her uncle is nuts. But on the other hand, well, she's unsure. I mean, what if it is not her uncle's imagination? What if all this is real?
Then what's my part in this? You couldn't get a cab?
I just wouldn't feel safe going alone.
So, she brings her hired gun, Edward, with her. Okay, they finally arrive. An old manor, used as a loony bin, in the middle of nowhere. The stage is set. The game is split into 5 chapters, with a prologue, which we will talk about later. But if you don't want story spoilers, go to here.
I just
I'm glad you're still here. You can choose to play either as Gifted Emily or Gumshoe Edward. There are some differences during a later chapter, but the overall story is the same. And for this story recap, we focus on Edward. So, after standing in front of the car for a while, patiently waiting for the player to choose between them, they decide to make their first move and knock at the door. Well, of course no one answers. I mean, what did you expect? That they open the door, crazy Jeremy comes out, and the game is over?
Hello?
So, video game logic. What does a private eye deduct if no one answers the door, but progress in the game has to be made?
Wait here. I'll go around back.
Exactly. He simply breaks in and makes his way to the front door to welcome Emily.
Thanks.
What are you doing? Who are you?
They are in Louisiana, 1930. Really? They can be bloody happy that this fine lady asks first and did not just decorate the walls with their brains. Anyway, their trespassing has been noticed and the happy pack appears. It's somewhat astonishing that they are all free to roam around. But then again, this doesn't seem to be a high security institution, so why not? After all, they might just be all a little bonkers.
We can't hear you knocking anymore. None of us can. Who is your uncle, darling?
Or maybe a little more. And great. In my opinion, every horror game should have a little psycho girl. Gotta love him.
Jeremy has gone missing. There's no need to worry, but it might be some time before he turns up.
Of course. We don't want this game to be too easy, right? So yeah, most of the game consists of our two intruders trying to find good old Jeremy. Anyway, breaking in was just not enough. The two simply don't give a shit and decide to make their way to Jeremy's room to snoop around a little. Edward finds something. Well, no shit, it's his bloody job. So, he finds Jeremy's diary, or at least the part of it where he writes about the dark man who appears every night at his doorstep, and that he has to hide from him by
moving from one misshapen memory to another.
He also mentions a talisman that he uses to go into his memories. If you ask me, a damn good reason and fitting excuse to include some sort of fast traveling system into the game. From here on out, the story starts to get completely bonkers, step by step. If you think about it, actually very fitting for the setting.
Miss Hartwood. Emily?
So, somehow observant Eddie just traveled to another dimension or some shit like that.
What the hell is going on?
In this dream world, and believe me, this is not one of your happy dreams. Well, Ed finds Baptiste, one of Dr. Gray's breadwinners, at the local pharmacy. He was searching for Jeremy as well and shares the same fate with our detective. He provides some hints towards our next objective.
He has this juju necklace that guides him.
The talisman?
That's right. It's some magic charm he got from Miss Jackson down the street.
The voodoo priestess.
Apparently, Baptiste had Popeyes for breakfast or so and is too chicken to go with that word. Anyway, off to the voodoo store. As the pro that he is, Eddie immediately finds the talisman,
Like the one in the painting.
uses his outstanding deduction skills to break the code back to reality, and shows his very caring nature by not giving a shit about Baptiste and leaving him in this nightmare. I mean, I can't blame him. He was inside of a psychopath's cozy dream. Anyway, from here on forward, traveling between the dream and real world makes sense, right? How it happened the first time? Who the hell knows? Back to the story. Edward finds himself in the shrink's office, and after this trip, he first needs a drink.
Anything brandy?
Oh, you do belong in the French quarters, Detective. Armagnac or cognac?
You know, just give me the cheap stuff. I'm not much of a connoisseur.
Yep, your typical gumshoe. So while enjoying his protein-unrich, high-calorie drink, they have a pretty useless chat.
Not really. I was hoping for some direction where to look next.
I'm sorry. I have nothing for you then.
Oh well, Eddie just wasted a 3-minute cutscene.
Detective Carnby, where did you go?
Smartass Emily is starting to realize that something might be very wrong in this place, and that our dear detective is starting to go nuts. I don't blame him. He just lived through a bloody nightmare and bottomed up some pretty expensive shit.
I want to try something. With this talisman, I think I can follow Jeremy to the place he mentioned in the book. What was the name? Do you remember something Spanish? Teroea. Yeah, that's where I need to go.
Detective, are you gonna be all right?
Yeah, of course. Go talk to Dr. Gray. We'll rendezvous later.
While strolling around the mansion and solving puzzles here and there, Eddie finds a letter from Jeremy describing that he is now able to arrive at his intended destination?
My talisman now knows these roads, and I have no need for the plates.
Jeremy's next stop, the oil rig. And of course, this is the next stop for our detective as well, obviously. To make it a little more challenging, the oil rig is in the middle of a sump area. I have to admit, a nice visual variation actually. So after getting to the rig and living his fantasy as a pyromaniac madman, Firebug Ed kind of traps himself.
Alright. Now what?
Well, lucky for him that the developers conveniently placed some cloth next to a zipline. Isn't that right? So, our badass detective zips down, and instead of finding Jeremy, he finds a boss and one of Dr. Gray's minions.
You after Jeremy too?
So it becomes clear now what the stuff we're saying all along. All hands on deck! Everyone has been searching for Jeremy. And well, not everyone can be as smart as little Eddie, and most of them got trapped inside of Jeremy's troubled mind. Baptiste in the French quarters, and this one, well, here. Luckily for Edward and his little revolver, no pun intended, he doesn't have to fight the monster, but falls right back into reality. After detectiving around, is that even a word? Well, Ed finds out that Jeremy is hiding in the chapel, of a graveyard of course. So after our hero puts his brains back into the game, quite literally I might add, and solved some more puzzles, the talisman takes him to the graveyard! Always a favorite in horror games, I must say. So, after a nice stroll through some crypts and caverns, he finally reaches the chapel where he finds one of the nutjobs, Elisabetta Perosi, in a coffin, dead.
Please don't touch her. Jeremy.
And finally he finds Jeremy. Game over? Luckily not by a long shot. Jeremy is actually not that crazy. He mourns Perosi's death. It all has to do with the
Dark man. Who is he? No, don't say his name. He can hear us.
Let me take that back. He is completely nuts. So Jeremy had agreed on a pact with this dark man of his to protect everyone and kind of sacrifice himself in return. A true gentleman. Well, not quite. So he sent Perosi to the library of Taroea to burn it down and break that pact. But she got smoked on the way.
I can't go there. Not allowed. But you wanted to. Can I go? Tell me, will it help me to break your pact?
The dark man appears,
Behind you! Run!
and Edward gets kicked back once again. This time with Perosi being dead for real. Uh-oh, Jeremy, what the f*** have you done? Next up on our detective's tour through Jeremy's mind, the library of Taroea, where no man has gone before. Well, actually no one. But that's for our next generation to decide, right? So once he arrives, he meets Juan Luis Jorge, an author who he read about. Anyway, the lazy lord is chillin' below a tree. He doesn't say anything groundbreaking or so.
I'm a man Jeremy has never met, and we are in a place that he has never been.
This place
It's
is
a representation of his mind at peace.
Following Juan's suggestion, our investigator heads out to, well, investigate the library, to find out the truth about Jeremy's relationship with the Dark Man, which hopefully helps him to break the pact. But first, a word of warning.
He is here as well. The Dark Man has been working his way through the text for a long time.
Great. Just perfect. So while lurking around the library and going to the very top, yeah, funny. Games hide key items always at the very top of the buildings. Always. Anyway, the Dark Man himself appears. And since Detective Edward Conan is no Chuck Norris, he has two problems now. Number one, when he gets too close to the really awesome looking dark fog that surrounds the man himself, he takes damage. And number two, when aiming at the Dark Man, he points the gun at himself. Some kind of mind-controlling shit that is going on here. Well, inside of Jeremy's mind. Shit, is this supposed to tell us something? So, going all John Striker, Eddie runs, but can't hide. And after reaching the top, he gets some chill time and reads a book. He's in a library after all, so why not, right? The book is about the Dark Man.
He was a kind of itinerant showman who held forth in public halls and aroused widespread fear. The New Orleans address of the event is lost, but I remember distinctly the Prext shipping company pressing.
And before giving away too much of the story, the Dark Man reappears. I mean, what the hell was Mr. Carby thinking? That he just vanishes because he climbed a ladder or what? Anyway, that one dude must have gotten really tired of chilling under the tree and helps him to escape. Edward gets kicked back to reality, chit-chats with one of his soulmates, this time Ruth Talone, and recovers by getting his health back one sip at a time. For the convenience of bringing the story forward without puzzles grounded in reality, at least for this time, Ruth beams him right in front of the waterfront office of Prext. So, inside the warehouse, our sniffer dog finds the address of the Dark Man's show, which is on a cargo manifest. Well, the manifest of the cargo that contained all the props for his show. Luckily, and since this is not one of those trendy walking simulators, it so happened that the address is right around the corner. Well, in this dream anyway. But of course, the stage is in a room at the bloody top of the building. Jeremy is already waiting there. Well, must be easier to go places when it's your own mind, I guess. Anyway, the two have a little tete-a-tete.
So you got scared by a stage magician, and now he's living inside your head.
You can mock me, detective.
After breaking the ice, our straight-from-the-shoulder detective asks the million-dollar question.
But there is a way to break out of the deal.
There is. You offered me a way out. Steps to take.
From here on out, the game starts to give serious hints towards the true identity of the Dark Man and what is actually going on. So anyway, the contract is in Egypt and Crazy Ed can conveniently dream shift to there through a teleporter disguised as a sarcophagus prop. And since Edward is not a bloody tourist who goes there for selfies in front of a pyramid or so, he has to find the access to the temple. Wait, did I forget to mention that the temple is buried? Just for this bit of extra challenge in Jeremy's Olympic Mind Games. So, naturally, Indiana Carnby has to descend to the temple, and really, this whole Egypt sequence gives out indie vibes. The variety that Alone in the Dark offers is just impressive. Okay, back to Egypt. After solving the mystery of the tomb, Edward Croft finds a ceremonial dagger and the pact. Dear Lara would have been truly proud of him.
Acknowledge psychological trauma, break through barriers of self-deceit, temper manic behavior. These are the Dark Man's terms. The contract.
I don't know. This doesn't sound like a pact at all. More like one of those yearly performance evaluations at the company I work for. Anyway, our newly crowned Tomb Raider escapes the sunken temple. In style. He wakes up in the attic where Emily finds him.
What are you doing?
Oh, I found some.
Great. Was it alcohol?
God, no, I just got the wind knocked out of me. I think I know how to break the contract with the Dark Man.
What exactly does that mean?
Everything going back to normal.
Alright.
So, yeah, no one can really blame Emily for suspecting that her hired gun went crazy. Well, at least he is at the right place, right? Before continuing with the story, so this is the 4th chapter now. And here's where Alone in the Dark was not bug-fixed well enough. So I strongly suggest manual saves. Actually from Egypt on already. Because now Edward can tackle several tasks out of order. And if he leaves some of those tasks half done, it is possible that the game softlocks, preventing any further progress. Back to the game. Edward starts seeing the Dark Man in the real world now. Maybe, just maybe our psychological expert Dr. Emily was right. So Eddie enters the empty room.
I belong here. I recognize this view.
Yeah, Emily got a point. So anyway, one of the dream sequences that Carnby goes through is admittedly one of the coolest in the whole game. It's about his own past and tracing back his steps to solve a case from a mom trying to find her kidnapped daughter.
God, I used to drink so much back then.
No shit. And what about nowadays? He drinks constantly to heal himself. I mean, this is one of the game mechanics, for God's sake. But more to that later. Anyway, after following some leads and climbing to the top of a building, yeah, again, Crazy Eddie finds the daughter. Her name? Grace. Actually, one of the nut jobs at Derceto Manor. Edward, in all his craziness, didn't even remember her. Like, at all. And he also did not remember that her father had kidnapped her and that unfortunately Edward found her. And that Grace's dad died in the process. We all know the rest of the story. Her mom didn't really give a shit about her own daughter and she ended up here, in the manor. Great job, Carnby. Great job. So, obviously, while just reliving this experience, he can't save Grace's dad.
Are you okay?
Don't leave me alone.
What the hell have you been doing?
Emily starts to be more and more concerned. I mean, who wouldn't be? Can't be just stumbled out of a bathtub, fully dressed and out of breath. Back to the main plot. So, it's nighttime now, and Edward is alone, so like, in the dark, get it? Anyway, his mention tour brings him to the infirmary, in the basement, of an asylum, at night. Great. Once there, Edward looks through Jeremy's X-ray scans. Well, let's hope these really are Jeremy's. He finds a huge black hole in the middle of his brain. And Dr. Gray? Well, as being such a great doctor that he is, of course, he wants to help Jeremy and, if necessary, even consider solving the problem once and for all. Through a lobotomy. Man, if only every doctor would show such dedication. Next up is one of Jeremy's therapy sessions, and to go to the bottom of Dr. Gray's kindness, Emily and Edward decide to break into his apartment. I mean, why not, right? They already broke into the Derceto Manor, so why stop there? Anyway, Gifted Ed finds another portal in the bloody closet.
Is there something in the closet?
Yeah, there is. You don't see the very obvious gate leading to whatever Jeremy's madness is serving up next?
I don't understand. Are you making some kind of fashion metaphor? I'm sorry, I don't have time for this. Can you just tell me what you're doing?
You don't see this.
And now is the time where we as gamers can really start to question whether he's completely bonkers or not. Which events in this game are supposed to be actually real and which not? The closet leads our fearless adventurer to the shores of Greenland. And when reaching the top, yeah, the top, used to that now, aren't we? So, when reaching the top, Edward gets attacked by a researcher named Jacob Van Ostad. Ed really doesn't have time for this shit now. He kills him and continues solving a nice puzzle. But wait, Jacob comes back, and he looks a little bit different this time around. Fortunately, Edward has his precious ceremonial dagger that he stole from the Egyptian temple, remember? So in good old video game tradition, he has to stab Jacob 3 times. After that, they both fly through all of Jeremy's dream worlds. Wait, what? Why? Well, once they arrive back in the real world, the answer becomes quite obvious, unfortunately. So, Jacob was no other than a projection of Jeremy, and Carnby just fucking lobotomized him. But no time to mourn. The Dark Man appears, and Ed beats the crap out of him. Oops. Turns out that the Dark Man was no other than Dr. Gray himself. So, it all comes together in the end. In the end? Oh no. If you thought that this was the f***ed up end of Alone in the Dark, then just wait for the grand finale. So, the Happy Bunch is having a party they have been talking about during the game. Well, yeah, and it is tonight. It is about giving a yearly tribute to the wishing tree, that's that giant tree in the courtyard. And what a surprise! This year is special. They use new words in their prayers, all thanks to Jeremy. Yeah, well, let's just say that this wasn't such a great idea. The tree awakens and kills everyone. Now this is some really disturbing shit. So, onwards to the final boss. A bloody tree. And oh, I hate bosses where there are those little annoying enemies spawning all over the place and not letting you deal with the big prize. Anyway, after that's done, the happy few that remain, Jeremy, Grace, and of course our two heroes of the hour, Emily and Edward, well, they leave behind the ruins of Derceto Manor to go on a joyride back to New Orleans. Okay, after this extensive and maybe a little sarcastic story recap, let's talk about the world of Alone in the Dark. Well, this is a game between two worlds. The reality of Louisiana on the one side, which is typically shown in warm colors, and the dream sequences on the other side. Well, more likely like bloody nightmares. Anyway, these are mostly shown using a darker color palette, and these styles fit extremely well to the mood the game is going for. Apart from the visual side, most of the world's backstory is actually brought forward by books and notes that you find. Those are completely voiced over, and the developers made sure that the voice actors use, at least in my ears, the right accent of the setting and era. This is immersive, but still clear enough.
Breck Shipping Company delivered 4 steamer trunks, 1 Egyptian sarcophagus.
Well, for the most part, let's say. There are all those little details the developers added to make the world feel more realistic. For example, when you close the inventory, Edward actually closes his detective notebook. This just very little animation fits perfectly within the setting of the game. As mentioned before, the dream world is shockingly atmospheric. Like this voodoo temple, for example. The green tone is how I would imagine it, how it should be. The shadows of the windows, it all looks like an artwork from the original game. Bloody brilliant. And since you wander back and forth between the real and the dream world, there are a lot of transitions between those two worlds. Well, the transitions are very sudden and give out a hard and shocking feeling. Like when you want to go through a door and all of a sudden you are in the Manor's past and everything is burning around you. The setting and the world help to visualize what is explained in documents you find. And the devs let you relive some of those scenes. This also helps with Edward's character build-up as you start to question whether any of this is real or whether he's just going nuts in a nut house. Back to the sudden transitions. These happen frequently and set the tone for the next large dream sequence. You never know what to expect, and this gives the game some awesome feeling of exploration. The devs also scattered some subtle scares here and there, like these glowing eyes. It feels random, but again, it helps with the atmosphere and not knowing anymore what is real and what not. But don't go into this game thinking it's an horror game, because it really isn't that scary at all. It's more subtle and more of an adventure through the human mind. To ground the game in reality, there are these lanyards. Well, let's just call these story-irrelevant items. I'll talk about these later, but these are arranged into sets, and completing most sets give you either background info about the world itself or explain actual historical backgrounds, like here about the Great Depression. This helps to place the game into its time frame and creates a believable world. But the world wouldn't come across as believable at all if it weren't for the characters. So, how are these? I'm glad you asked. Okay, So you can either play as Emily Hartwood or as Edward Carnby. Emily is modeled after and voiced by Jodie Corner, and Edward by David Harbour. Yeah, think about it. Bloody Hellboy. But not only for our two heroes, no. Across the board, the cast is very professional and great at delivering their lines. Back to Edward. His look is strong and rough, which fits perfectly to the character he portrays. A hired gun from the era.
Did you bring a gun?
Yeah. You think it'll actually come to that?
A natural and believable delivery of their lines. What else is there to say, really? On your way through the manor, you encounter several patients of this mental institution. This results in some disturbing but very well-made short conversations. Those don't really contribute much to the main story, but these are here to set the tone and atmosphere of the game. And all of them are fully voice acted and motion captured. It's just fun to watch them play out and shows how much effort was put into this game. Why fun, you ask? Well, of course, all these patients are either drunk, nuts, or both. I mean, this is an asylum after all. So that's what you can expect. Again, these are awesomely voiced and played and give you some more personal background about the characters. Okay, so the characters' writing and delivery is great. But how do they look? The character models are not AAA, but they do show some really nice effects. For example, when exposed to fire or explosions, the character models get all charcoaly. Or when you take damage, your clothing starts to be more and more soaked in blood and your face and hands get scars. Well, that is until Edward takes a sip from his flask. And since the interface is not always in your face, but disappears after a while, it is great to have this level of detail making you aware of what condition your condition is in. Another small attention to detail is when Edward approaches a railing, he naturally rests his hands on it. Little things like this make the characters very believable. So, in summary, Alone in the Dark has a completely crazy story, which is good. The world is believable and set in Louisiana in 1930. But the game truly shines through the writing of the characters and their delivery.
What are you doing in my kitchen? I assure you. No,
I'm sorry.
I promise you. Mr. Hartwood
I
is
was just
nowhere
looking
near my
for-
kitchen, and neither should you be.
Therefore, story, world and characters get an 8.8 out of 10. But story is not everything. After all, this is a game. So how does it play? And settings are first. So when starting the game, you already have to adjust the brightness and contrast even before getting to the main menu. While bothering, it is a good thing, since the main menu screen is quite atmospheric, I have to say. Next is the settings menu. Here there are just some basic gameplay settings that could have been left out at this point. I mean, the key adjustments are actually the ones that are grayed out for now and that can be set after starting the game. Audio. I always appreciate to have a choice of different dub options. Otherwise, this is basic stuff, like switching subtitles off or on, and actually very important for streaming and recording, you can deactivate copyrighted music before you get a bloody copyright strike from YouTube. A much appreciated setting. The graphics mode is set to performance by default. Of course, your non-gamer friends might want to come in here and change it to quality mode. And then there is this data collection checkbox. I honestly don't get why nowadays even a single-player game wants to collect my data. Off. Finally, when starting the game you have got 3 difficulty options. Standard, hard, and easy. And finally, a recent game that does not have that story difficulty bullshit for all those non-gamers that just read about a game and feel bloody left out when there's no autoplay option. What the f***? They did include it afterwards. It is now called modern for politically correct Roblox players. And old school for us fans who actually don't mind using their brains when playing a game. But don't worry, These general settings can be refined later on and adjusted to your liking in the pause menu. So, while already talking about settings, let's get this out of the way. Manual saves are available. Yeah, I know. How old school! And due to some game-breaking bugs that have been reported, I do highly encourage basically everyone to create frequent manual saves. But the game also has an autosave feature. And I couldn't find anywhere to switch it off, at least on consoles. The game constantly autosaves, sometimes when just changing from room to bloody room. This starts to get annoying pretty soon. Every time, every single time, when that little save camera icon appears on the top right of the screen, the game stutters. Okay, so much for the settings. So the main game mechanics are to explore the mansion, solve puzzles, and avoid or kill enemies. As for the exploration part, quite early in the game you find an interactive paper map. Yeah, right. Anyway, this one is super useful since it shows you the rooms you have been in, the rooms that still have secrets to uncover, and whether doors are locked, unlocked, or blocked. And again, some attention to detail went into this. For example, the map updates from just showing the room numbers to showing the names of the residents once you find out who lives where. Let's talk about the puzzles next. First, the standard puzzles of any action adventure. If you want to even call them puzzles. I mean, to collect keys and to open doors, that's it. But man, this animation when you unlock doors, there's a very old school feeling to it. Love it. It never gets old. And as mentioned before, you also come across these story irrelevant lanyards. These are grouped into sets. If you complete a set, it unlocks some additional info or some really awesome gear. So be on the lookout and go to all those little circles that pop up on your screen. You really don't want to miss the good stuff. So there are basically 3 different kinds of puzzles in the game. First, logic puzzles. This here is an example and the very first puzzle in the game. Easy, right? Well, bloody more difficult than any puzzle that exists in Dead Space. And therefore, although both are considered survival horror games, they have a completely different approach and should not really be compared to each other. Well, at least not like I just did. Okay, so these logic puzzles get more complicated later on in the game, but never really to a frustrating level. The second type of puzzles can be summarized as environmental puzzles. This one here you encounter towards the beginning of the game. So you find a bolt cutter which you use to open a shed. There you find a hose, connect the hose, turn on the water, and the water level of the well will rise, giving you access to a piece that you need to in order to solve a more traditional puzzle. Now this gameplay resembles more the gameplay you would find in a traditional point-and-click adventure. And this is what shows what the devs were actually going for. I really love the mix of action combined with a real adventure game where you actually have to think and use your brain to combine and find solutions to puzzles. It is so refreshing in times where many AAA titles are just influenced by PR departments and market studies. And they hold your hand at all times to make sure that nothing is too difficult for your general brainless audience. I guess this is one of the reasons why Alone in the Dark did not sell that well. It's just not mainstream. Well, this and the complete lack of marketing. A shame. A shame, I tell you. And lastly, there are puzzles where you need to combine different elements from the environment with one another. And together with documents that you find. Just combine all of it in your mind and find, for example, combinations to a lock, which then opens a drawer. On to fighting. Okay, first I want to mention that you find bullets all across the game world. The people of this manor are real lunatics. I mean, who the hell hides bullets in an oven, a kitchen cabinet below the kitchen sink, and so on? But then again, this manor is some sort of mental institution anyway. There are not many weapons in this game, and this is again because Alone in the Dark does not try to be an action game where you solve all your mysteries guns blazing. But of course there are a couple here. First, every detective's fellow companion, the revolver. Highly inaccurate, and there's really no punch to it. Empty one round to take down one of the earlier enemies. Yeah. And now here's something that sucks. You can only carry a max of 26 bullets around. I mean, I get it. Edward Carnby is no John Rambo, but still. I would have liked a little more freedom here in having more ammo and therefore using the weapon of my choice for each situation. Next, you come across a shotgun. So this one is locked behind a glass cabinet. And surely enough, Edward is too civilized of a detective to try to break it open. Even when being haunted by monsters. Well, either that or the glass is bulletproof. Anyway, to get to it, you need to complete one of those lanyard sets. Once done, the cabinet magically opens and you have access to this bad boy. The shotgun is powerful and a blast to use, but then again, not very accurate. I mean, yeah, who would have thought, right? And it only holds 2 slugs before you have to reload. Annoying. But at least the reload animation feels really archaic and fits perfectly to this brutal weapon.
Out of bullets.
So, the last real weapon is the Tommy gun. Of course, every game has to have some sort of machine gun, right? So this one is awesome to use and shreds through 1 or 2 enemies without problems. And that's already the negative. Besides the extreme recoil, it also has a super small clip size. I get it, maybe it's historically accurate, but still a pain in the ass. But as mentioned, this is not a shooter, but focuses more on the adventure and the story portion. And that's it. Those are your 3 weapons. Well, there's one more handgun actually, a flare gun. It holds 1 bullet at a time and is used in a very specific section of the game to brighten up your mood. But that's it now, for real. Good thing is that you can also pick up melee weapons. Bad thing is that these break after a while, like typically after 2 enemies. But worry not, you come across these everywhere. Broken pipes, pedals, axes, and so on. You can only hold 1 melee weapon at a time. I get it, but still, it kind of sucks. So, when that one breaks, and since Eddie is too shy to use his fists, actually I'm not sure where this blood on his knuckles comes from, it's a mystery. Well, when your melee weapon breaks, you will have to first find another one to continue your rampage. Also interesting, bricks lie around everywhere. Especially on cars. I'm pretty sure that cars were not particularly cheap in the 1930s. But hey, it's a dream, so whatever. You can use these bricks to distract enemies. And since they get distracted by sound, bells also work. So actually, the game encourages you to avoid enemies and sneak around. Again, adventure, not action. But not only bricks lie around, no. You can also pick up and throw Molotov cocktails. Yeah, I know. How can our alcoholic detective encourage the misuse of booze by throwing it around? Well, I guess whatever does the trick, right? Anyway, weapons would not be any good if there wouldn't be enemies to use them on, right? So let's look at a few of those. There are adult Groots. Yeah, more like humans that grew roots all over. Then you've got humanoid-looking abominations. Like 2 humans attached to each other with worms growing out of their backs. And they also throw this shit at you if you're not careful. Then there are these sandworms. Not really a problem if you keep moving. Well, until I figured out that they are not just your standard timid Frank Herbert sandworms. No, not here. These motherfuckers spit some serious shit at you. So my advice? Finish them fast with whatever you're holding. Bats. These are annoying. You have to dodge and melee them. Or wait for the game to realize that you want to go all indie style. Most times, you hope for the auto-aim to work and that the game lets you finish those suckers with your gun. Face huggers. Yeah, well, these are here too. And that's basically it. Not a huge variety, but then again, this is not a game that took Chuck Norris movies as a blueprint. So eventually one of these bastards will take a bit of your health down. So how do you regenerate? I'm glad you asked. This is not one of these games where time heals all wounds, no. This one here is old school. In true detective fashion, booze heals all wounds. And it's a good thing that Alone in the Dark doesn't have one of those shitty mechanics to simulate you getting drunk or anything. Carnby is a true detective. He handles it the way he is supposed to. Like nothing ever happened. Unfortunately, you can only carry 5 drinks with you. I get it. It contributes to the atmosphere, but come on. We all know that detectives in the 30s were all bloody alcoholics, so please, give him some more. He really needs it. Okay, let's talk about some gameplay tips next. Well, the obvious one first. The help system. You can of course go all lazy and activate all the help features in the menu. Or you can just look at the really cool journal feature. It keeps track of the story and tells you what happened and what is your next task. And it does this from a third-person view, like a bloody story.
And that Detective Carnby and Emily should come back tomorrow, hoping to wrap up this case before...
Next up are the doors. You can open these gently. It's a great animation and so on, but man, when you're in a pickle with enemies chasing you, you can yank a door open while running. This seems to work only when enemies are around. When they are not around, well, you will have to live with the animation. Anyway, when it works, it's perfect for escaping, since enemies are too brain dead to open doors. Okay, the best for last. There's a neat little bug to repair your melee weapon. When it is about to break, the game shows a small symbol on top of the weapon symbol. If at that time you go to another weapon, change it, and then change it back to your original weapon, ta-da! Repaired. So mechanics seem to be all good. But how does the game control? The controls are pretty standard and work well. Standard third-person shooter stuff without a cover mechanic. But there are also some negatives and positives. Let's start with the negatives. I mentioned enemy distractions earlier, like by throwing a brick. Well, the controls for that just suck. Not so much for the aiming and throwing, that's actually very smoothly, no. Once you pick up an object, Sir Edward instantly ages by like 100 years. He can only move super slowly and you can't just hold a brick and walk around. No, you can only hold it while aiming. Either that or I just didn't get it. A very positive section that controls like shit is a truly excellent homage to the beginning of the series. There's one area in particular where the game switches to fixed camera angles. As said, it controls like shit, but it is truly great to play and shows how much the developers cared for the game's legacy. All in all, it is very refreshing to have a true action-adventure game in this day and age. With complex puzzles and all. Everything basically controls as you would expect, with one exception that I just couldn't figure out. With that, game mechanics and controls get an 8.1 out of 10. Presentation is next and visuals are first. Overall, the visuals are somewhat between good and really impressive, depending on the section that you're playing. Here, I want to talk about some examples. The character models are very detailed and show, for example, nice skin effects. Also, when selecting the playable character, the selection is pretty cool and the transition from here to the following sequence is buttery smooth. So, as mentioned before, this is a game between two worlds, and two or more completely different visual styles. The warm colors of the real world and the dark dream world. It awaits with very atmospheric effects like the fog. It actually feels more like dark London in the late 1870s rather than New Orleans in the 1930s. with sparing warm lights while everything else is sunken into a foggy darkness. The transitions when wandering from the real world to the dream world and back again are mostly very sudden. But strangely enough, this fits the characters who suddenly find themselves somewhere else and are disoriented. In many cases, these transitions mix real-world elements with dream-world elements. It gives everything a surreal feeling to it. This happens on a small scale, like here, this hallway. But it often also happens on a big scale, with the complete architecture being integrated into the next sequence. These just look amazing.
I made it. I entered another one of Jeremy's memories.
Also, all rooms of the manor are beautifully crafted with a high level of detail and include puzzles that are nicely integrated into their designs. You can truly feel the effort that went into this. The library, for example, with its fireplace lit, casting reflections on the floor. All rooms that have a French influence, since the setting is basically the countryside of New Orleans. The drawing room, or Grace's room, for example. All rooms look handcrafted, well, which they are. Before we change the subject, yes, there are sewers, because it is apparently an unwritten law that a game cannot be complete without them. But hey, honestly, they look pretty good in Alone in the Dark. Worth mentioning is also the interface. It fades away after a while if you're not being attacked or are not shooting, reloading, or recovering health. This is a nice touch since half of the game is an adventure and the interface is actually not needed. It lets you immerse deeper into the world. While talking about the presentation, there are obviously some glitches that need to be mentioned. I mean, the very first scene already had slow-loading textures. The very first scene. So that set me up for no good, but it's really not as bad as some review scores might indicate. There are some glitches here and there. For example, wheels sinking into the ground geometry. Changes from cutscenes to gameplay have these frame fragments that pop up in between. Reflections on mirrors are not 60 FPS, more like 16. Glitches when enemies clip through doors or when parts of Edward clip through objects. And of course some physics glitches. But let's be honest, these are all few and far between. And all in all, I found very few glitches in the presentation. The visuals are atmospheric and truly support the game. But what about the sound? The game offers lots of calm, ambient sound effects. This creates a dense atmosphere. Okay, so the complete game is voiced. And by that I mean the complete game. Not only cutscenes or voiceovers of letters and so on. No. You can even let them read Edward's detective license.
Louisiana State Board of Private Investigator Examiners grants the following license to Edward Carnby, Decatur Street, New Orleans. License number 1.
Don't get me wrong, it's really nice to have this option, but it does sound funny at times. Then again, you can switch it off anytime you like. And the devs actually went the extra mile and did not just have the cast read lists, no. Instead they changed these into vivid texts which provide additional information.
Magdalena Thompson, or Mags, is responsible for the household.
Such attention to detail shows that the devs really cared and carefully crafted this game. And there's actually indeed something to it. Everything is professionally voiced. The actors put their emotions into it and you can feel it. The voices really support a great world building.
Oh, in that case, we'll just wait in his room. You don't mind, do you? It's upstairs, right?
Wait, you can't.
Don't worry, we'll be discreet.
In the corridor. It's the first door on your left. I'll tell Dr. Gray you're here.
Excellent. Thank you, madam.
Great delivery. Same as with...
Sure, but he is crazy. And he's gone missing. Why?
And these are just 2 examples from the beginning of the game. Believe me, it gets much better later on. The voiceovers are very realistic. This means for me, that with some characters, I definitely needed the subtitles.
She's sure getting her money's worth tonight. You would thinking, man, compare.
So the voice cast and delivery are simply put amazing. I'm not exaggerating here. Then of course you have your standard ambient sounds. And some scared the shit out of me. Like when a door closed behind me. Music is next. When there is music, it feels threatening. When there is. Mostly, I actually enjoyed the lack of music. Of course, it could be simply because I deactivated the copyrighted music in the menu. But to be honest, I wouldn't want it any other way. It builds atmosphere. Talking about the atmosphere, in some scenes there is music which sounds vaguely familiar and very fitting to the set piece. But then again, at the same time, they managed to give it a very disturbing touch. In summary, the visuals are good to great, depending on the scene you're playing. But where Alone in the Dark truly shines is with its cast and their delivery of the characters. The music is fitting and I appreciate actually the lack of it. With that, presentation gets an 8.8 out of 10. Onto the overall score. Alone in the Dark really surprised me. I enjoyed this adventure from beginning to end. The story, world and characters just drew me in. And when I was not playing the game, I wanted to go back and play it. And that's a feeling I didn't have for a very long time. I went into the game expecting a survival horror game like Resident Evil or Dead Space. Basically focusing on a dense atmosphere and gunplay, maybe even lots of gunplay. But Alone in the Dark really surprised me with its intriguing puzzles. It is not only a game between two worlds, no. The split is also noticeable within the gameplay, each world focusing on certain aspects of it. As far as the presentation goes, yeah, the visuals are good and in some sections actually outstanding. But what really sold me was the sound. The delivery of the characters is just fantastic. With that, Alone in the Dark gets a final score of 8.6 out of 10. If I were to summarize it in one short sentence, I would say, an elegant game for the more civilized age. On to final thoughts. I was that surprised about the game that I would recommend this game to point-and-click adventure players rather than to people looking for yet another action-adventure horror experience. Anyway, if you're fine with puzzles, I can only recommend this one to you. And no worries. If you get stuck, you can always turn on the hint system and the game will guide you through the puzzles. Okay, here is something that we haven't talked about yet, and I feel this is the right section to do so. The Prologue chapter. It can be downloaded for free from the different storefronts. So many people were disappointed with this demo, and I can see why. But honestly, that's their misunderstanding. Because it is not a demo, it is simply a prologue where you play as Grace. It explains some small events that led up to the beginning of the game. So it naturally should be treated as a prologue and not as a demo. Hell, it is called Prologue, period. So it is very short and it took me only like 5 to 6 minutes to complete. And yeah, people complained about that too. But again, it's not a demo. It was meant to get you into the right mood. And the devs made it very high quality, with sequences specifically for it, fully voiced by the same professional cast that also voiced the main game. Now, should you play this before or after playing the main game? Well, in my opinion, after. Yeah, I get it, it's a prologue, but hear me out. You play as Grace, and during this prologue she's working on things that you will only understand after completing the main game. And it gives away one set piece and a transition that will occur a lot in the main game. Therefore, for your first playthrough, just play the main game first. It's actually very funny and weird to play as Grace after completing the main game. all of a sudden you're playing as this free-spirited kid and the game's perspective is much lower, obviously. The same locations feel just different from her perspective. The only criticism I have is that it is not on the disc. It should have been on the physical disc and selectable from the main menu. Like this, not everyone will download 10 gigs for a 5 to 6 minute experience, and who knows for how long it will be available. What a shame! Final thoughts on the main game? Well, you never know what to expect. Solve puzzles, enter very different dream worlds, solve more puzzles, and everything through the blender. You really never know what to expect next. In terms of replayability, well, the obvious is to experience the game from both views, Edward's and Emily's. So yeah, definitely replayable. And there's also a New Game Plus mode where all weapons are unlocked from the beginning. The game took me a little short of 10 hours to finish. And I was reading all the documents. I played it more like an adventure game. So there you go. If you rush through, of course you can finish it much faster. But then again, this isn't an action game. Well, thanks for sticking around till the end of this review of Alone in the Dark. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.